Welcome to the Healers Café, conversations on health and healing with Manon Bolliger, a retired and deregistered naturopathic physician with 30 plus years of experience. Here you will discover engaging and informative conversations between experienced healers, covering all aspects of healing, the personal journey, the journey of the practitioner, and the amazing possibilities for our own body and spirit.
So welcome to the Healers Café. And today I have with me Dr. and Professor Marc Cohen. And so he's a medical doctor, university professor, author, poet, entrepreneur, wellness trailblazer, and a perpetual student of life, trying to co-create a culture of wellness. Now, there's so many things you do and so many things that you could talk about, but I wanted to, first of all, welcome you. And I know you do poetry, so any poem you would like to open this session?
Sure. Well, I mean, I've spent the last 40 plus years studying wellness and 38 years at university, and I've summarized wellness into a recipe.
Okay.
And it's very simple. So the recipe for wellness is simple, and it's bathe in beautiful water, prepare delicious food, make the most of every breath, dance through every mood, tend the soil beneath your feet, embrace sunshine from above, share your gifts with all the world, and fill your life with love.
Wow.
Yeah. So wellness is simple. We make it complicated, and then we make industries out of it. And but yeah, if you get to the essence, it's actually quite simple. Follow that recipe, and you'll have a good life.
Yeah, it sounds that, and reach everybody, right? I love the way that of all of the things that's the one that I've connected to. I mean, being a naturopath, right? So a lot of them are natural to me, but beautiful.
So, a friend of mine recently said I've created a new genre of poetry, which is naturopathic poetry. Because I've tried to just summarize medical information, and then I'm a sort of accidental poet, because a lot of this stuff has just come out as poetry. I didn't intend it that way. I just wanted to summarize information.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things is that we tend to complicate things, trying to understand how things work, and then get into, and that's actually what's happened wrong in our profession. As I'm a naturopath, or I should say I was a naturopath since I had to give up my license. But it's like we're trying to be something that we're not, and we're trying to complicate pathways that are very interesting, but the essence of naturopathy everyone can do, and it's accessible to everyone, and really basic principles that everyone can benefit from. So why don't you tell us a little bit how you got into all this, your journey, and then I don't know where we can start, but
well, it's been a long journey, and actually I got into it because I wanted to learn how I could have the happiest, healthiest life myself. And I figured medicine would teach me that. And I had this long academic journey through Western medicine. And I did an honors in physiology and psychology, then a PhD in Chinese medicine. And I did a second PhD in electrical computer systems engineering and became a professor. And I wrote this textbook here, which is like been the Bible for naturopaths for the last 20 years in Australia. It's had 4 editions, and this latest edition is 2 volumes and 1,600 pages. So that was my education in herbs and supplements. And then I've been involved and interested in the fun side of health. So bathing, and I'm doing a lot of work with hot springs around the world, and sauna bathing and ice bathing, and relaxation, and creating a diploma right now on hydrothermal wellness. Done a lot of work with the herbal medicine industry. In the lockdown, I created a company that makes living probiotic kombucha vinegar, where we take kombucha with 200 probiotic strains, and we put in leaves, roots, flowers, fruits, and fungi, and we select them on their properties, and there's a whole range of extremely alive tonics. And I'm still evolving. I recently, it was only a couple of months ago, I've just joined the board and invested in a honey company that makes the world's most potent Manuka honey. And they do this by, they've sampled the most potent flowers, the leptosperm flowers, and they sampled the nectar and found out which ones have the high DHA in the nectar. And now they're growing plantations of these Manuka honey forests. And my mind's been blown about honey, actually, because honey is such an incredible medicine. And the word medicine actually comes from mead, the same origins. And you can put honey and vinegar together and make oxymels, which are a naturopathic form of medicine. They're incredibly delicious. You know, you've got the sourness from the vinegar and the sweetness from the honey, and they're incredible medicines. And they're available to anybody. You can make them at home. And things like hot and cold bathing, which you can do at home. So I've sort of coined this term ancient future medicine. And I'm engaged in researching that right now, and all the things that are available to our prehistoric ancestors, and looking at those from a modern lens of advanced science and actually bringing them to the world in a very simple way. So that's what I'm doing at the moment.
No, you seem to really like enjoy this, you know, and it's not work when you actually enjoy the everything that's being produced by Earth, and then how easy it is for us to incorporate it. So one thing about honey, I'm wondering, you know, you've written hundreds of papers, so I've been told and read that that now it's very difficult to get honey that isn't full of pesticides because of all the spraying. And I was thinking, do honeys have a mechanism where they can deal with that so it isn't in their honey? Or that was a question.
Well, they actually say that about a third of all the honey in the world is counterfeit. It's not even real honey. Right. They use sugar syrup or corn syrup, and they either feed it to the bees or they dilute it. So there's this whole counterfeit ring, which is bigger than the counterfeit olive oil industry. Right. There's a massive counterfeit honey industry. And then we also have this incredible tragedy of colony collapse. So bee populations around the world are collapsing, and that's due to pesticides and electromagnetic radiation and climate destruction. And just it's not healthy to truck bees around to crops, to monoculture crops. Bees are like humans. They need a diverse diet. They need, you know, pollen sources with high protein that's diverse. They need different nectar sources. They need that all year round. And because with modern agriculture as a monoculture, they'll flower for a few weeks. Like the biggest pollination event in the world is the almond pollination in California. And that requires all the bees in America, all the commercial beehives, 2 million beehives approximately, go to California for 3 weeks. But then after the flowering's happened, it's like a desert for the bees. So they have to be trucked around the country to then support the bees. And bees have a very, very strong sense of geography. They know exactly which flowers where, and when you truck them around, that's not good for them. And when you mix them together, they spread varroa mite and different viruses. And then they can go to crops that have been sprayed, and they bring the pesticides back, and that can actually also kill the bees. So we're in this sort of crisis at the moment with modern agriculture, and we're losing our pollinators. Yeah. And I've just started working with a company based in Ballina near Byron Bay, Australia, and they've come up with a concept called the medicinal honey forest. So rather than moving the bees around to the crops, they actually plant crops around the bees. And we've designed the different plants, and we're based on the leptosperms, which is where we get Manuka honey from. And there's 87 species of leptosperms in Australia, as opposed to only one species in New Zealand. A lot of people think Manuka honey is from New Zealand. Well, there is one species of leptosperm in New Zealand. I went there about 600 years ago, but there's 87 species in Australia. So we have very potent Manuka honey here. And if we plant not just Manuka, not just leptosperms, but other fodder plants for pollen and for nectar and things that flower all year round, we can keep the bees really healthy. And that's the best defense. Just like keeping yourself healthy is the best defense against any other parasite or virus. If we keep the bees healthy, that's their best defense. And also we give them everything they need. So they don't have to travel, 5 kilometers in one direction. They have to travel 5 meters. So we get a lot more honey. We get healthy bees. And we're making literally the world's most potent honey. And then I've just come on to be product development manager for this company, Gather By. And all the different products you can make from honey have been used for literally millions of years. So they actually say that honey is what made us human, because honey is the highest carbohydrate source. It's the highest natural energy source of any food in nature. And because the primate brain is very glucose hungry, honey not only gives us a big glucose hit, but it's also a preservative, so we can store energy. And honey is a preservative for anything else. So you can put herbs or any other foods in honey and it'll preserve it. And they actually say that the first stone tools ever used by humans weren't to hunt animals, they were actually to hunt beehives, to cut into beehives and get honey. So honey has this really ancient history. At least 1 million years before we were using fire, we were actually getting honey. And honey still has this incredible potency internally and topically. Manuka honey is probably the best wound dressing you can have. There's no other modern wound dressing that is superior to Manuka honey, just straight on the skin, straight from the beehive to your skin, to your wound. You can put it straight on an open wound, and for non-healing wounds, and also for acne and other skin conditions, because it's highly antimicrobial, but it actually destroys the pathogens. So topically it's amazing, but then also internally. And there's a recent systematic review said if you have a gastric ulcer, Manuka honey will affect the Helicobacter and improve your gut health and immune health, and it's got anti-inflammatory action. So yeah, honey is a wonder, and we're making a whole lot of products, and it was sort of a bit funny. I mean, I'm as I say, I'm an accidental poet, but I'm also an accidental company creator and product creator. So I created this kombucha vinegar company in the lockdown, because I was in Melbourne and we're the most locked down city in the world, and a friend of mine had a kombucha company, and we actually did 2 research studies on that kombucha and showed that it has 2.5 times the polyphenols of green tea and 200 probiotic strains. And then we did a study where we showed if you have the kombucha with a meal, it reduces your blood sugar by 20% after the meal compared to diet soft drink or soda water. And that was the first ever published human clinical trial of kombucha. We published it earlier this year. And just recently, the second study ever on kombucha came out, was done in Georgetown University. And they gave a glass of kombucha, that's 220 mils, every day to diabetic patients for a month. And they found out 1 month of a glass a day actually reduced their blood sugar, and it gave them much better blood sugar control. So that was amazing to learn about kombucha and the kombucha vinegar, which is makes it shelf stable. But then I'm just learning about the oxymels, and I'd never heard the word oxymel before. I'm supposed to be an expert on natural medicine, because I literally wrote the textbook on herbs and supplements, but I'd never heard the word oxymel. So oxymel is oxy, which is acid, and mel, which is honey, and it's vinegar and honey together. And every single medical tradition, the ancient Greeks and Chinese and Ayurvedic and Egyptians and Babylonians, Assyrians, they all used oxymels, vinegar and honey, and then you can put herbs in it, and it becomes this incredibly delicious, it's like liquid candy, that it's really, really potent as a medicine internally. But it's also, there was a study just published this year showing that you can use it topically, and that you can have honey and vinegar that by themselves aren't at the inhibitory concentration for bacteria, for pathogens on the skin. But if you mix them together, you actually get a bactericidal effect at levels that individually they wouldn't do anything. So oxymels can be used topically as well as internally. And the thing is, they're delicious. Mm-hmm. And people can make them at home. All you need is a source of raw honey. I mean, we use the world's most potent Manuka honey, but you could, as long as you've got your local beekeeper, go get some raw honey. Apple cider vinegar you can make at home. Kombucha vinegar is actually easier to make, and most people don't know about kombucha vinegar, but it's more potent than apple cider vinegar or balsamic or grape vinegar.
So how would you make it from, so let's say from the kombucha?
Basically, you make kombucha and you neglect it. You just leave it.
Yeah.
Just leave it for 6 months or 4 or 5 months, and it'll ferment out, and all the sugar and the alcohol will get fermented away, and it'll become very strong in acids. And acetobacter makes acetic acid, and gluconobacter, which is sort of a holy grail, makes glucuronic acid and gluconic acid. So, but just making kombucha yourself and then leaving it, you get this incredibly rich kombucha vinegar. And tea, I mean, you're making kombucha from tea and sugar, but tea has more polyphenols than apples or grapes. Mm-hmm. Now, we make most vinegar from apples or grapes because they have their own sugar and they naturally ferment. But so with tea, you have to add sugar, and you can either add sugar in the form of, we use, organic or biodynamic raw sugar, but you can add honey and it becomes jun, Jun, and that's just honey and tea that's fermented. And because tea is so high in polyphenols, it makes a much healthier vinegar than even apple cider vinegar. And what we discovered, and it was really surprising when we did it, when we published this physicochemical and metagenomic analysis of the kombucha, we found that it actually has more polyphenols than the green tea we started with, which means that the bacteria and yeast, the SCOBY, the symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeast, are making new polyphenols with the fermentation process. So they're actually bioactivating the tea and the healthy chemicals within the green tea. And you can do this at home. I mean, we make it in bottles, and we add leaves, roots, flowers, fruits, and fungi, and we design that for your gut or your brain or your hormones. And we have one called the flu shot, which has all the herbs that are active against COVID and the flu. But that one, they're all the really bitter, pungent herbs. So if you have the flu shot by itself, it's like a punch in the face of bitterness. It's andrographis and Artemisia annua, wormwood, and horseradish and echinacea and reishi and elderberry, elderflower, tulsi, astragalus. It's all these really pungent, potent herbs. So it's very bitter, but the bitter flavor is actually really good for us. And most people don't get enough bitterness in their diet, or if they do, they get bitter from chocolate or coffee. That's a main source of bitter in the modern world, not bitter greens, which is really healthy, or bitter herbs, which are often medicinal. But if you have bitter, it helps balance sweet cravings. So if you're a sweet tooth, have some more bitter in your life, and you'll reduce the sweet cravings. Bitter also prepares the liver for digestion, and it opens up the palate. So that's why people have digestive bitters before a meal. It opens up your palate, so it means you enjoy your food more. You'll get more flavor out of your food. It activates the liver, so you'll digest your food better, and you tend to eat less and be more satisfied. And also, if you're having it with a kombucha, it reduces blood sugar after the meal, so you don't get that high and low in insulin and sort of a crash after the meal. So having a little shot of some bitters before a meal is a really traditional but very simple thing to do.
We were brought up that way, and have dandelions in our salad, and and it's funny because none of us actually crave sugar, and so I thought, it's because we prefer bitters and stringent sour things, but maybe, like you're saying, they're related.
Well, they are. I mean, in Chinese medicine, they talk about the 5 flavors: sweet, salty, spicy, sour, and bitter, and you want to balance those. And if you feel you're craving one or more over the other, you might say, there's an imbalance there, and you can correct it just by changing your diet and the flavors you're playing with. And I've been playing with that with products. So you've got the honey, which is really sweet. Mind you, if you ferment honey, you get mead, but if you ferment honey in tea, you get jun, and you can make jun vinegar. So you can make sour honey. And then you can put herbs in honey, and we're experimenting with different Australian botanical herbs, things like finger lime and strawberry gum and gumby and kakadu plum. We put that in the honey, but then you can mix the honey with the vinegar. That's the vinegar's sour, the honey's sweet. Then you can put bitter herbs in that, and then we're even putting salty red algae, Dunaliella salina, which is the most salt-tolerant life form on Earth, that forms in red salt lakes, and that's what makes pink, the lakes pink. And this red algae, it's salty and fatty, and you mix that with honey, and you've got this amazing combination of sugar, fat, and salt, which is what the food scientists call the bliss point. So you get a bliss point of it just satisfies your sugar, fat, and salt cravings.
What would your life be like if you were pain-free? If you were one of the millions who suffer from chronic pain, the thought of just one day without it may seem impossible. This is often because conventional medicine tends to fall short in the treatment of pain, opting to prescribe pills or recommend surgery rather than getting to the root cause of the problem. But if you are suffering with emotional or physical pain, there is hope. Join the founder and CEO of Bowen College, Manon Bolliger, live online for your body-mind reboot. Learn how to listen to your symptoms and get to the root cause of your pain. Plus, be trained in basic Bowen therapy moves so that you can reboot your body for optimal health. You don't have to live in pain. You can heal. Stop the pain pill cycle by visiting www.yourbodymindreboot.com to learn more and to register.
It becomes really moreish, and just a very small amount. It's really highly nutritious. It's the highest natural source of beta carotene and other carotenoids, which are these fat-soluble antioxidants that protect us from sunburn and support the immune system, and they're pro-vitamin A. But it's actually just delicious. And I would never have thought mixing algae or seaweed with honey would be something that would be great. But it's amazing.
Yeah.
So
What is
yeah, go on.
What's the seaweed you mentioned?
It's Dunaliella salina. So it's the most salt tolerant life form on Earth. It's a phytoplankton, so it's a single-celled organism. And to survive, when seawater goes on salt flats and then evaporates, it becomes very, very salty. Right. And this normally green phytoplankton, marine algae, to protect itself from the sun and the salt, it makes glycerol and fats to balance the osmotic pressure with the salt outside, and it produces very high levels of carotenoids, which are these fat-soluble antioxidants, which actually protect our skin from sun damage. Wow. So it turns sort of red, and that's why we get these pink salt lakes, and that's actually the reason why shrimp and flamingos are pink, but because of this red algae at the bottom of the food chain.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm just learning so much about this stuff. It's fascinating.
So while you were speaking, I was a thought came to me about what about, like they say with young babies or infants, past like 6 months, but never to give them honey. Is there a reason for that, or is that a myth from everything you've? Well,
if you've got an infant, the best thing to give an infant is breast milk.
Yes, I get that. I agree.
And that's got all the fructooligosaccharides and supports the gut microbiome. Now, if you're going to give an infant any sort of sugar, honey is probably the better sort if it's raw honey. But it's honey is such a high impact, fructose glucose load that it's not a basic food for infants. Mind you, there are some tribes still today that get 80% of their calories from honey, the Hunza tribes in Africa. And, they're the honey hunters. So honey has had a bad rap. And that's because a lot of it is counterfeit. It's actually not real honey. But yeah, it's not infant food.
Because I was wondering too, now there's been a recent study, about a year now, that a lot of the newborns are born without a functioning flora in response to the mothers who, unfortunately took this thing.
Most people don't have a functioning flora. And that's because, we've got chlorine in our water, we've got pesticides on our food, we take antibiotics, we eat dead ferments. Most of the foods we eat in the modern world are fermented foods. So if you think about, bread and cheese and wine and beer and coffee and chocolate, they're all fermented foods, but they're dead ferments. There's no living bacteria in them anymore. And if you think about our ancestors before refrigeration and even traditional cuisines, they would have eaten something living with every meal. And usually it's a side of, pickles or kimchi or sauerkraut or living yogurt or something that's alive, because fermentation was a basic food preserving method, but it meant we were constantly eating probiotics and prebiotics and postbiotics, and we've lost that. So most people really, their gut flora is decimated, and having chlorinated water, that affects it. And I was just reading a fairly recent study that says that our skin microbiome is also being affected. And when I went to medical school more than 30 years ago, we were told that the skin surface area was 1.8 square meters, about the size of a single bed if you spread the skin out, and they use that for burns calculations and things. But recently there was a study published in Nature that said, well, if you count all the little dips that the skin makes, so all the sweat glands and sebaceous glands, you've got 2 million sweat glands, and where the skin goes down and up again, if you count that, if you spread that out, it's about 30 square meters. And in the little dips in your skin, that's where your skin makes natural oils. And those oils feed good bacteria that protect us from pathogens. And those oils also protect our skin from drying out and protect our skin from sun damage. So they actually, those natural oils prevent wrinkles, prevent sun damage, and prevent infections. Yet most people in the modern world bathe every day in chlorinated water. And the reason why they use chlorine is they don't want to have big public outbreaks of typhoid or cholera. But and the reason why they use chlorine is that chlorine is so toxic and so potent that it'll kill bacteria at 0.5 parts per million, which is the level when it comes out of your tap, which means you're waging war on your skin bacteria every day. And also that chlorine will oxidize the natural oils in your skin and dry it out, which means you have to put moisturizers on your skin and protect your skin from the sun, whereas your skin has its own natural protection. You think our ancestors used moisturizers or had sunscreen? They had their natural oils. That because we're stripping away our natural oils, then we're stripping away our natural defense against sun, wrinkles, skin cancers and infections. And it's a bit of a tragedy, really. And it's the same in our guts because we're eating, drinking chlorinated water, eating pesticides, not eating living foods, having antibiotics. Most people do, and then we're having cesarean birth. And the good midwives would, it doesn't sound great, but they'd put a finger up the mother's rectum and then wipe the baby's mouth with it, and inoculate the child with fecal flora. Yeah. That doesn't happen anymore, and then we're giving antibiotics and all sorts of toxic medicines to our infants, and we're just losing that connection with nature, and we're also not going out into the soil. Where we, nature bathing and exchanging bacteria and DNA with the soil and the trees. So we really lost touch with nature, and I think we can regain that.
Yeah, well, I certainly hope so, because the incubator babies of the future that are genetically modified to be, I don't know what, living GMOs that are made, to all the likings of certain people. It's not tempting. But tell us a little bit more about water, because I have noticed that, if you have a well, you're lucky you're sort of on top of it. But if you're stuck with municipal water, I've noticed, because I'm very, very sensitive to everything, so I just can't drink it. But now I feel it smells. It's gotten, they must have increased the amounts.
Well, it depends which area you're living in, but usually your water comes pre-poisoned with at least two sort of very potent poisons. You've got fluoride, which is a neurotoxin. You've got chlorine, which is just a biocide, which just kills life. Yeah. And then, depending on where you live, it's going through pipes and a distribution system that could be, more than 100 years old. That's laced with biofilm. That's got all sorts of outflow of petrochemicals and pesticides and pharmaceuticals and a whole range of what they call emerging contaminants. And that's on top of, heavy metals and all sorts of toxic elements in your water distribution system. And it's not what water once was. So if you have a well, and even it's depending on where you live, you need to check your well water, because there is arsenic and even radioactive elements that can come up with well water.
Yeah.
And water it's the basis of life. I was fortunate. I went to in 2016. I spoke at the International Conference on the Physics, Chemistry, and Biology of Water, which Gerald Pollack runs, and this was in Bulgaria, and learned a lot about water there. And there are 72 scientific anomalies that we just don't understand about water. So water's a whole new frontier of science. But what we do know is the water's such a small molecule compared to all the other molecules in our body that if you count the molecules in your body, you're 99.99% water molecules. So you're 2/3 water by volume or by mass, but in terms of the molecules, collagen and proteins and nucleic acids are massive and water's tiny. So we're 99.9% water. Yet in biochemistry and in medicine in general, we focus on the 0.001% of the molecule, and we neglect the water that we're made from. And if you're going to do one thing to improve your health, and it is to improve the quality of the water that you're bathing in and the water that you're drinking. And there was a really interesting study done in the late 1990s where they were looking at chlorinated water, and they were measuring the disinfection byproducts, so the trihalomethanes and all these toxic byproducts from chlorine in the bloodstream. And they compared drinking 2 liters of chlorinated water, and when you do that, it doesn't. These byproducts don't appear in your bloodstream, and that's because the liver filters them out. So it's not good for your liver and might contribute to fatty liver and things like that. But the liver does filter them out. But if you have a hot shower or a hot bath, and they actually measured just the skin contact with water, where they had people breathing fresh air, but in skin contact with a chlorinated bath water, that chlorine went straight through the dermal barrier and bypassed the liver, went into the blood. And then they did another thing where people were in the bath with a little, like a plastic wetsuit on, so they weren't touching the water, but they were breathing the air from the bath. Right. And just by breathing the air, you absorb the chlorine, and chlorine, of course, is volatile. So if you have a hot bath, it just becomes volatile into the air. And then you breathe that in, and it bypasses the liver again and goes straight into the bloodstream. Yet when they measure the dose of chlorine that is acceptable for humans, they don't count dermal and inhalation absorption. They only count ingestion.
So what are the systems or ways that that you're familiar with, or that you recommend to diminish or remove those
well, I mean, the best way is to have a natural source of water, and just use that, of course. If you're stuck with, and if you can afford it, a whole house water filter is the best thing you can do. So filtering all the water you're bathing and your
but like with,
and if you can't afford that, there's some little tricks you can do. So if you've got a bath, if you fill the bath up with hot water, like hotter than you can normally stand, put the fan on and just wait 20 minutes. And in those 20 minutes with the fan on, the chlorine will evaporate. And after 20 minutes, you'll still have a hot bath, but it'll be relatively chlorine free. And that's a good way to avoid that chlorine without having to go to the expense of a whole house water filter, or moving to somewhere where you can get natural pristine water.
And as far as like filters, does charcoal do the trick, or do we need a lot more? Or
well, yeah, water filtration is a really complicated thing. In fact, it's one of these things that again, I accidentally created a water filter company. And this was for many years. I was talking about toxicity with my patients, and I'm a big fan of Bill Mollison, who was a founder of permaculture, and he says, when you get the basic things right, other things go right by themselves. And when you get the basic things wrong, it's really hard to play catch up. And water is as one of the most basic things in our life. I was really passionate about having good water for my patients, so I went down the rabbit hole. And this is when I was studying water, and I was speaking at water conferences, and saying, because I wanted to find which water filter could I recommend to my patients, and it's complicated. So my patients would ask me, "What's the best water filter?" I'd say it's complicated, and they go, "Well, you've got 2 PhDs and a medical degree. If you can't work it out, how are we supposed to work it out?" So fair enough. Okay, so I spent quite a bit of time trying to work it out, and I've sourced what I thought was, I was just trying to find the filter I could refer it, but there wasn't one. So I actually sourced the best components, and there was a Russian technology which involves activated charcoal, but then also an ecopolymer it's covered with an ion exchange resin. So that so activated carbon will remove chlorine and the odor, but it won't remove a lot of heavy metals, radioactive elements, and things like pharmaceuticals and pesticides and these emerging contaminants. And it's very, very hard to remove fluoride. Once you put fluoride into water, it's really hard to remove. There are 3 ways to do that. You can either distill the water, with boiling it. You can use reverse osmosis, which is expensive. It wastes a lot of water, and you have to store it. It uses a lot of energy. Or activated alumina, which requires a very long contact time with the water, and it's not sustainable. You have to clean it very, very often. So it's very hard to remove fluoride. But the other emerging contaminants, heavy metals, etc., are quite able to be removed, and with a flow rate that you can actually put it on your whole house. So I've got a company called Beautiful Water. So beautifulwater.co is my company that makes domestic water filtration, and I really set that up for my patients and for myself, because I wanted a filtration myself.
Will I don't have those links, but would you be able to send us that so that?
Sure. Well, I mean, if people go to, I've got my own website, Dr. Marc, just drmarc.co, and all my links and companies and stuff there. So I've got a kombucha company, I write children's books, so I'm doing honey. I've got lots of different things going on.
My goodness, so this was like a wealth of information and passion all in one.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't work, I just do what I do, and my curiosity leads me that way. And I was really passionate trying to help people during the pandemic. And I told you I'm an accidental poet, so for more than 30 years I was a professor and doctor studying integrative medicine. And at the start of the pandemic, I was trying to think, what are the things people can do at home that require very little cost, very little training, and very little equipment, that have research evidence that they reduce anxiety and fear, and that they improve immunity. So this was the brief I gave myself. So I started writing down all these different, natural sort of treatments and lifestyle activities you could do, and it turned into a poem. And I call this poem "The Whirl of Wellness." And there were 50 different activities in this poem, and I've actually referenced them. So if you can go to my website and you can click on the activity, and it'll take you to the research behind each of the activities. So this is I call it the Whirl of Wellness, but I say it's how to go from wired and tired to chilled and fulfilled, or how to go from stressed and depressed to joyfully blessed. So this is the whirl of wellness. Hold someone's hand, gaze into their eyes. Go barefoot in nature, bask in sunrise. Choose a dance partner and go find your groove. Do Tai Chi or yoga, mindfully move. Share a massage, enjoy healing touch. Focus on one thing and don't think too much. Make time for a hobby, play chess, fly a kite. Make use of your hands, draw, paint, sew or write. Help someone in need, donate to a cause, play games, meditate, read stuff from bookstores. Turn off your screens and get a good sleep. Declutter, spark joy and love what you keep. Dig around in a garden, pick up a guitar, slip into a bathtub, sauna or spa. Care for a pet, take up a sport. Go on vacation and make your home a resort. Lie in a hammock, relieve pent-up stress. Relax and do nothing, and then do even less. Laugh out loud, share a joke, give someone a kiss, say a prayer, chant a mantra, and follow your bliss.
Wow. That's great.
And it's simple. These things aren't complicated.
Well, thank you so much for spending, our times are different zones, but spending the time together, very inspiring, and we'll definitely put your website up there so people can follow all these things. And also, we haven't had time to talk about breathing and Wim Hof, but it'll all be there, right?
Yeah, I've got a lot of content. I think more than 100 scientific papers I've written. They're all on my website, and my children's books and my poetry's there. People can, please explore.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mark.
No, it's a pleasure. That was really fun. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us at the Healers Café with Manon Bolliger. Continue your healing journey by visiting thehealerscafe.com and her website, and discover how to listen to your body and reboot for optimal health.